Right now I have this part intro bracket open, and from this I can create an assembly in two different ways. We can create an assembly from scratch just by going to New and choosing Assembly, and there's an option for Make Assembly from Part. I'll go ahead and start by just using the New and choosing Assembly. When you create a new assembly, typically you're going to be brought into this Begin Assembly interface, and this is going to show any open documents. We can also browse out and choose out different files. If we have a certain part we're looking for, we could find it and open it up and add it into the assembly. When you do click on a certain document, once you hover into the workspace, it's going to populate a visual of that part and allow you to place it into the document. In my opinion, this is a little bit misleading because when you drop this in, you drop this into arbitrary space, and then by default you're unable to move the first part that you add into an assembly or first document that you add into an assembly. So you'll see next to the intro bracket in the assembly manager a F for fixed. And this is sort of arbitrarily placed away from the origin based on where we put it into space. So one thing that's typically a good practice with an assembly is, rather than just clicking arbitrarily into space, choose the Feature Manager Design Tree, open this up, and choose the origin. And this is going to line up the standard planes in your part or your assembly that you've added in with those in the assembly, making this a little bit easier to work with, especially if we're going to create any patterns down the line. So with that F next to the intro bracket, we know that this part is fixed. When you try to drag it, you see the selected component is fixed. It cannot be moved. If we do go ahead and right click in, there's an option for float. So if we did later want to go in and drag this thing around or use mates instead of the fixed condition, we could do that as well. But for now, I'll leave this as fixed. From here, I can go ahead and add in more parts, or in this case, I'm just going to create several copies of the intro bracket. So the first way in which I'm going to do that is I'm going to hold down Control and drag out a new part, and once I release my mouse, it's going to add in that copy. I can also do that by grabbing it in the Feature Manager Design Tree and dragging it out. Once I release my mouse once again, it's going to add these in. And then I can drag these two new ones as any subsequent parts we add come in a floated state. And most of these concepts, along with moving and rotating these components, I'll cover again, or cover in much more detail in the assembly section of SolidWorks. But for now, I'll go ahead and create a simple assembly here. So we're just going to go ahead and stack these plates and get this fully defined. Just like in a part, if you click on any one of these features, parts, or edges in the workspace, you're going to get this context sensitive menu. Now what we want to do here is mate these together, and so we can choose mate here. We can use our S shortcut, choose the mating option, or we could use that contact sensitivity to do it. The mates within the assembly are going to try to come up with the most likely mate type that you're trying to create. For example, if I choose 2 cylinders, this is going to default to concentric. And I can do the same with these two and click OK. And you can also make other areas of this concentric, but that'll create more mates than necessary, which we typically don't want to do. Then I want these two to be on top of each other, so I'm going to choose out this face. And I want to select the bottom face, so I can either rotate, or I could right click in and choose select other and choose this bottom face. Now if I exit the mates, I see that this is fully defined at the top, and this one remains fully defined. And I'll go ahead and just quickly do the same with the other part, this time using the contact sensitivity. And instead of using this face, I'm going to use these two edges, and this is going to add a coincident relation by default. And since those two edges are coincident, it also makes this concentric. Once you do add mates in, you'll see this mates folder get populated. You can see these first two concentric that we created, as well as the coincident for that first bracket 3, and then the other two, the coincident and the concentric. You'll also see when you pull down the entire part, if I'm looking for specific mates involving my bottom plate, I just simply have to open up the Feature Manager design tree for the part and look in the mates folder. I'll also go ahead and create a quick exploded view of this assembly, and we'll do that just by choosing that tool, and we can drag out this part and then drag out this part, and we have a new exploded view. And the exploded views are going to be linked to configurations, and I'll speak more about this in the assembly section, but simply if I right click on that, it'll collapse this back down. So that's a brief intro into creating assemblies. This will be covered once again in significantly more detail in the assemblies section of SolidWorks.